Thank you to Blinkist for sponsoring this episode. Blinkist is an app that allows you to understand the most important thing from over 6,600 nonfiction books, summaries, and podcasts. With the very little idle time I have these days, Blinkist allows me to still get some reading in while I work. Recently, I've been listening to Ben Wilson's Metropolis, which is a book all about cities, mankind's greatest invention. I've also had a chance to refresh myself on a few books I've already read, like George Orwell's 1984. I have to say it's been pretty great to get through more than one book in a day. Blinkist is awesome because it boils down these titles into blinks, so you can read them or listen to them in as little as 15 minutes. One of the new features of the app is Blinkist Spaces, which allows you to create a space with friends or family where you can add, share, and recommend titles from the Blinkist library. A space can be for a group of people or a topic like productivity or mindfulness. All members of a shared space can access all titles in the space, with or without a Blinkist premium subscription. Get 25% off Blinkist annual premium. Start your 7-day free trial by clicking the link in the description box. So thanks again to Blinkist for sponsoring this video. Now back to the show. Hello everybody, hope you guys are all doing super duper swell. So let's go ahead and start off with the first project of the week, which is a bit of Tuckpointing. So here we are in the basement by the workshop. By the workshop I was cleaning. You know, we're under my lumber storage here. And this wall was looking pretty bad. Still looks, well, pretty bad. But these sections here were pretty large holes. Basically, the mortar had completely washed from these areas. And to put this in reference, this is actually the side of the house that is right next to my neighbor's. So this is where that little corridor is between the two houses. And I know for a fact that this wall on the outside is also covered in cement, which is not helping the integrity of this wall by any stretch of the imagination. And that'll be something I have to remedy at another time. But for right now, I can worry about this wall. So we got a decent amount of pointing done down here, filled some really major gaps, and use more or less the same technique I used on the outside of the wall, as opposed to what I did in the vet clinic, because you'll never see those walls, and I just used my palm and just shoved things in there. Got lots of, mortar on the stones themselves, so it doesn't look great, but then again, that's all behind beadboard now. Here, I actually want to keep this wall exposed, so I try to do a much better job about actually placing mortar in the correct way, cleaning up the face of the stone, because the old limestone foundation is actually really pretty if it's done correctly. But of course, I still have a long way to go with all of this. I have to rake out all of this old mortar, mostly because if I don't, it will continually rain old mortar down here, and I want something that isn't a perpetual mess. I also have to rake all of whatever this stuff is. I think this is actually painted drywall mud that somebody put on the stone, or something extremely similar. It's really weird. I guess was some weird attempt at trying to waterproof this, which if you've watched my videos before, is never a good idea with stone like this. You can't waterproof it. Don't even try. You need to solve whatever underlying issue is and why there's water coming in at all. You don't try to stop it coming in, because it's still going to get in and it's just going to wreck your foundation or brick wall or whatever masonry structure we're talking about. So yeah, Needs to be pretty good amount of cleanup done to this wall. And since there's a few rainy days next week, I think that's the perfect time to go ahead and finish that off. Need probably 2 more days and we'll have a perfectly good looking, beautiful wall. Of course, as soon as that's done, I think I will go ahead and move these items behind my lathe because I don't really want them here anymore. For reference, what we got here is actually 2 rather large pocket doors and a few little sheets, random pieces of drywall, things like that. Main thing is, realistically, is just move the sheet goods and the 2 pocket doors. Pocket doors, I'm not actually quite sure what I'm going to do with them. I saved them from a house that was being completely gutted and renovated. I was offered them for free. Maybe when this area does become bar, they become paneling to some kind of booths or part of the bar down here. Or if somebody needs, I think they're 10-foot tall pocket doors, please let me know. Actually, they're 10 by 4. They're big. I think they're oak as well. But, I couldn't let somebody just trash giant oak paneled pocket doors. So, I've got to hold on to them. Another thing I got to do this week was go back over to Eric's. And, of course, work more on the parts for the Mansard roof. And let me just say, going over there and speaking with him at any amount of length is a huge learning experience for me. It's one thing to pick up a book or read online or forums or whatever, trying to figure out how a lot of these old machines work. It's another thing to watch somebody operate one and ask questions on the fly. And so I've gotten a huge amount of just watching him work and asking appropriate questions at the right time and helping where I can. It's really boosting my confidence that I'm going to be able to build all the stuff Eric can here, hopefully somewhat shortly. So much of it is just kind of figuring out which way to approach a task. And of course, how not to get bitten by one of these machines, because you mess up with some of these things, they'll take digits or more. And here in the very near future, I hope to share some of Eric's wisdom that he shared with me with you all. I know I've gotten a huge amount out of it, and I think you guys will too. Then lastly this week, there is this. What you guys might recognize is the bandsaw that I showed you guys that was in the garage. This bandsaw is a Crescent Machine Co. at Latonia, Ohio. Why the I is missing in Latonia, I don't know. But I actually looked up the city just because I was curious to know where it was from exactly. And yeah, there's a mistake in the casting, so it's missing an I. So, not a Holland Brown, but a nice little table saw. And even better, it was a free table saw because this was actually given to me by Eric. He asked me if I wanted a little table saw for the basement, and I said yes. Now that was a little over a year ago, and I'm finally getting to putting it together. Now, of course, this looks a lot different than what it did in the basement, mostly because I've taken a lot of it apart, cleaned everything up, did quite a bit of pen striping, as you can see, which I think looks pretty good. What's an old machine or even an old sewing machine sort of thing without a bit of gold paint? So, really am liking the way that's turning out. And I made this, which is its new, really beautiful walnut and maple tabletop, which was something that was super necessary because this right here is what came on it, which is a plywood multi-plank kind of amalgamation that was no longer flat. It was really in terrible shape. And without a new tabletop, when I would cut things would not be straight because if this surface isn't flat, when the blade comes down, you can't get a 90-degree angle. And that's something that's pretty necessary. That, and because the old tabletop was such a rough surface, things wouldn't glide as easy on it. And again, it's another pretty necessary thing. Most of these tools were sold with metal bases. This one obviously was not.
although maybe in the catalog it had an option. I know the Holland Brown ones did. Now you might rightly ask the question, Caleb, why go through building such an elaborate table for this machine? Well, it's because there's historical reference for these types of tables on these old bandsaws. Let me show you. So if I reference one of my Holland Brown woodworking machine catalogs, again, this is Mr. Brown's house that I've been working on. If we flip back to the very first bandsaw, you can notice that the table is a wooden table on this one that is striped. Now, the ones that I've seen at other shops that retain or have been replaced with a table that looks like the original, it is maple and walnut, both really hard, durable woods. Why the stripes? I'm not sure. Maybe it's just an aesthetic thing. Maybe it helps you calculate, I don't know, your cut or something like that. But they definitely look beautiful this way. So I went ahead and built mine just like this. For reference, this is a 30-inch bandsaw, and mine is a 20, or the little one here is the 20. I also have a 36 outside. Like I said, if the Crescent catalog is anything like this one, then they would have been sold with either an iron table or a wood table, so you can choose. But of course, there's a big difference in weight. The iron table alone is an extra 200 pounds. So yeah, things add up really quickly. Now there are a few things, of course, I do need to fix and repair on this. Obviously there is no blade. I do want some sort of guard on this, but I obviously don't want to hide away the beauty of the saw like modern bandsaws do. I've seen a nifty little attachment that you can build that will come off of this screw here that will stop the blade from coming off and at you. Here's one that I saw in Patrick's shop. This guy I know in Kansas who has an amazing line shaft shop. This is what he's done on his saw to keep the original feel of the saw intact and still add a slight level of safety. So I'm going to be building something here that will do just that. There is also the problem that this upper wheel, because it doesn't actually have a bearing, because it doesn't have that, this metal rides on this single axle here. And it's obviously lubricated, and after spinning for so many years, this machine's probably somewhere over 100 years old. And of course that will take a toll after a while, and so there's quite a bit of play in this wheel. It's kind of hard to see, but it kind of bounces around. You can kind of see it back there. So it's not perfectly centered on this anymore, which means this wheel here will probably have to be bored out, and a brass bushing will have to be put in its place to keep that perfectly tight on that axle to keep this wheel, spinning smoothly and giving me a precision cut. Should be a fairly simple thing to do. I basically just gotta take this part off, give it to a guy who knows what they're doing with, machinist tools, and it should be a fairly quick and easy repair. Next week, I do want to show you guys how to build a pretty table like this. Maybe you want to build a cutting board, or I don't know, maybe you have an old antique bandsaw you want to put back together. But this is a really fun, random project I got into, and and since I already have to build the secondary part of the table, I figured I'll bring you guys along and do a bit more of a deep dive into what it takes to build something like that. Also, the reason there is actually a split table here, while there's two separate ones, is this actually rotates at a 45 degree. As you can see down here, this is the mechanism that does that. This is the tightening bar, so if I loosen that, you can actually rotate the table up to a 45 degree and make a better cut, although that's probably not all the way up, is it? There we go. So there you can make your 45 degree cuts as well. A function I don't know if I'll be using all that often on this little baby bandsaw, but you never know. I definitely don't want to take functionality away from it. My initial goal this week wasn't actually to do any of the stuff I showed you in this video. Initially I wanted to get outside because the weather's starting to warm up and get going on, the summertime, springtime, fall time projects, the stuff that I can't do in the winter because it's too cold or it's too rainy, mostly cold. Certain materials just don't work in the cold. Big ones being the stripper that I use on the stone front and all of the masonry products. You cannot do that stuff when it's freezing outside. And the problem with this week is I had a little bit too much rain. It was just a touch too cold to really get into anything out there without the risk of damage to whatever I was working on. But this coming week is a slightly different story. I say slightly because we're going to get some rain, but we're not going to get a lot of cold air, which is super awesome. I'm excited we're coming fully now into spring, and I can get back to these projects outside that really make this old girl shine. So in an ideal world, if everything works out weather-wise, I'll get back to stripping that last little patch of paint I have on the stone front of the facade. I also want to run a test patch on the slates up on the Mansard roof to see if I can actually get that red paint off of there and preserve and save some of those slates, at least for, like I said, a few years, a decade, 20 years maybe. Fingers crossed, maybe 20 years. Before I have to, of course, replace all of the slates. Next, I want to start figuring out what the feasibility is for the garage. I want to start poking around there a bit and seeing what I can get moved around and organized a bit better so I can really start attacking that area and figuring that out, because of course I need a functional shop, and the basement is going to be a big step towards that. But the shop outside, but the garage really gets me a full working shop. That way when I do want to replace components of doors, windows, basically anything, I can make it myself. I don't have to call, rely, ask anybody. I will still probably call and ask Eric for at least advice. But that's a lot better than stopping him down from whatever project he has going on, especially if I'm desperate for something. But yeah, overall, this entire week has been a big learning week, learning about woodworking. I've been reading on a book called The Slate Bible to get myself ready for when the weather and the time period hits where I can work on the slate roof and get going there, do all the copper flashing, do all of the things that make this whole project shine. And it's been a pretty humbling week in that respect too, because I realize even with all of the stuff I've learned doing this house, from plaster to repairing old machines, to masonry, to carpentry and tile, and on and on and on, etc. There's still so much I have to learn. And while I think a lot of people see that as a daunting thing, I recognize it as a challenge, but a challenge that is going to be a lot of fun. I really enjoy taking on new tasks and learning new skills and testing myself every day. And I will say, if you're not that type of person, I think a project like this would get overwhelming really quickly, because there is a lot of this stuff that I have to do here that is hard. But honestly, I don't think I would have half as much fun as I'm having doing this project if it were easy. And on that note, I'm going to leave you guys. So as always, thank you guys so much for continuing to watch this project come along. I think we're going to have a much more exciting and maybe a bit scatterbrained again week next week, depending on what projects I can fit in with whatever weather window I have. But either way, no matter what, there will be progress done, and I can't wait to share it all with you. So I'll see you then. Until then, take care. Bye-bye.